Welcome to this episode of the Varsity Voices. Today we're diving into the shifting landscape of high school sports, from NIL deals and transfer trends to the rising pressures on coaches, athletic directors, and student athletes. The game is changing fast. We're entering an era where high school athletes may need more than just a coach and a parent. They might need a lawyer, a social media manager, and someone who can read the fine print on NIL deals. Are high schools prepared? Do they have the staff and resources to keep up? And if schools aren't helping them do that, who is? Let's break down the biggest changes, the challenges ahead, and what the very near future could look like for high school athletics.
If you are looking to buy or sell a home, contact RE/MAX Realtor and Circle of Legends recipient Christopher Cobb. Let Chris's extensive negotiating experience work to guide you on all of your real estate buying and selling needs. Contact Christopher now to discuss the right strategy for your personalized real estate buying and selling plan. His number is 630-420-0070, or you can visit his website at christophercobb.com.
Welcome to the Varsity Voices. We are here again with all of the information that you are looking for and would like to hear regarding high school sports, with a particular focus on the Chicago Catholic League. Make sure you listen, like, and follow, and wherever you're listening from. And we are always here to provide you with all the up-to-date information that we can. So we like to have different particular topics, Dan, and we talked earlier today about some of the things that are affecting high school sports and how much change is going on. And one of the things I thought about after you and I talked, Dan, was that's a 5-alarm fire. All right. That's where we're at, I think. You know me, I tend to overreact to things, and but when I look at all the different things that are going on in high school sports, and you look at NIL, you look at transfers, you look at right to play, you look at the amount of the amount of money that's involved, when you're talking about kids who are looking to go to college and get recruited and get that particular NIL deal. How much pressure, Dan, do you think that is putting on high schools and high school administrations, especially the athletic administrators at this point?
Yeah, and perfect analogy that it's like a 5-alarm fire, like a tidal wave. It feels like it's kind of crashed overnight, doesn't it? Where it's like, holy cow, if I'm an administrator, I've got to think about, how do we handle transfers? What do we know? Who is the person that understands this? And do we have time to deal with this? And not only transfers in, but how do we keep our own talent here? How do we manage that? How do we make sure that kids are aware of any NIL opportunities? You get a superstar, and once it's superstars, it's going to start to trickle down if someone has success. So it won't just be the superstars in X amount of years from now. There are a lot of things that you've got to think about other than scheduling and bus scheduling and the things that were, a lot to do and still are a lot to do. But the things that were your focus 5 to 7 years ago, gosh, I think that's almost got it. You've got to have someone that is knowledgeable, similar to, God, it's like a general manager.
Right.
You almost need someone that can oversee all these new aspects of high school sports that are just rolling in on a wave or a little fire smoldering in the corner that's about to blow.
Yeah. And you mentioned it. It's more than just, let's say, from a athletic director standpoint. Whereas prior to this, and I'm not simplifying it in any way, but I mean, their responsibilities really are managing the athletic programs, or scheduling games, managing budgets. What they have to do now is they've got to oversee NIL education, right, and compliance for some of their athletes. Not all their athletes, but some of their top athletes. This is becoming a reality. They've got to deal with transfers and the paperwork that goes along with that, the eligibility rulings that goes along with that, because transfers are here to stay, whether states allow it or they don't, and whether they deny certain things, there's going to be follow-up as well, and there might be some legal ramifications or lawyers involved. There's the whole social media thing and the digital presence. You've got to attract kids to your program because of that. You've got to help them build a brand, maybe. You've got to deal with more media requests, and there's much more managing of live streams and video platforms and highlights and that kind of thing. It makes me think that the athletic directors, and I'm just talking about athletic directors at this point, not coaches, their responsibilities are expanding, and I'm not sure just an athletic director can handle all of this.
No, and I think their staffs have increased. I see more assistant athletic directors now in the past several years than you've ever seen in the past. But I think that that comes with kind of the average growth in sports and what has happened over time, and the addition of new sports. You've got new flag football. I've heard schools talking about frisbee golf. And some of these things that were kind of things that kids did in the park 15 years ago are now IHSA sports. And so just that type of add-on of sports and things that go along with all those need buses, and all those need places to play. They need places to practice. So you've got that growth. And then kind of running up on the side of it is all this outside, I'm going to call it noise for lack of a better term, because it's more than noise, but
okay,
of the NIL and the transfers and making sure, and the technology, it is, I think the staffing is going to change, and it's going to have to change, and you're going to have someone, maybe you call them a compliance manager or someone, but someone that knows the ins and outs of this and has a pulse of your programs and making sure that your current players are happy and getting what they need, because you don't want them to transfer.
Right.
You want to keep them in. So there's a lot to it from an athletic director point of view. I would imagine that it can be overwhelming when you think about your day to day as an AD or an assistant AD, and that trickles down to the coach. I think a lot of these things now are falling on the coach, and the coaches have to be like, I start football practice in 2 weeks. I've got to worry about installing defense and a depth chart and making sure that players have equipment. It's like I can't do all this other stuff.
Right. And we were talking about athletic directors, but if you think about the coaches, like you just mentioned, not only they're expected to coach the team, and I say this in the context of those programs, schools, coaches, athletic directors who want to continue to stay competitive in today's world and today's environment within high school sports. So not only are coaches expected to coach the team, but they're also expected to promote their players, right, to colleges.
Right.
They've got to. It's no longer a 4-month, 5-month endeavor for them. It is a year-round program, whether it's around strength and skills programs. If you're not doing something year-round with your kids within the rules, obviously, you are falling behind. there's a whole online and media aspect or social media aspect of it where you would think coaches have got to be monitoring that as well. They've got to be navigating parents and boosters' expectations, whether it's tied to NIL or recruiting outcomes. So the coaches themselves really have a lot more than just coaching the football team, which I know if you look at it, you think, yeah, that's old school, coach is a coach is a coach. But like I said, if you want to stay up to date, stay um, at the forefront of what's going on in high school sports, and really stay competitive and not fall behind, you've got to be doing these other things, and you've got to be promoting them too. You've got the kids who want to come into your program, come into your program and play for you.
Yeah. And I've often thought about the phrase, when coaches are going to be replaced or want to be replaced, and you'll hear people say, mostly on the college and pro level, you don't hear it on high school, maybe locally you might, but you hear, quote unquote, the game has passed them by, right?
Right.
And it used to be where, well, he does 3 running plays and punts, and that's no longer the game. Or his defense is still a 6-1 when no one's doing that anymore. Or he doesn't believe in adding coaches to his staff, and he wants to draw power right in the dirt and have the players practice it, and that's what we're going to do. But it was kind of hard to see. This, you can see it clearly. I think there's so many ways to measure, has the game passed a coach or a program by. You're looking at social media. What's their social media presence like? What's their transfer process like, in and out? Are they welcoming to transfers? Is it easy to transfer in within the rules? But so obviously you've got to take that into account. Or do they know the rules? Are they aware? And people will start to talk about this. And there are all these other aspects, Joe, that where you might be a great X's and O's guy, you might run a great practice, and the game can still pass you by because of all the outside influences that are happening. It's really interesting. It's almost as if controlling the outside stuff, that social media, the recruiting, the technology that's involved in the game. We've 20 years ago, Joe, huddle wasn't a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it was very early on. Now it is integral. If you don't have that huddle sideline or a similar product, you're behind. You've got a team on the other sideline looking at a big screen TV, watching their last series, while you're talking to coaches and saying, I think they were in cover 2 that whole series, but it could have been man. I'm not sure.
Right.
If you're doing that versus the other team reviewing huddle sideline, you're behind in that game. And, we haven't talked about technology or on the field stuff, but that's evolving as well. And it's all these things that's clearly visible. Why doesn't our program have huddle sideline working? Or why doesn't it, why do they seem to have it so much more figured out than we do? So there is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff. And if that all falls on the head coach, it is going to fall through the cracks, because I think they just have too much.
They do.
They need support.
Yeah. So that begs the question, Dan, do high schools need to add more staff? And I've thought about this when you and I were talking about a couple of these topics, and I kind of broke this down. Do you want to hear how I broke it down as far as what I think high schools need?
Lay it on me.
Whether it's from additional staff or whether it's from additional expertise on their staff, but here we go. So for one, I think high schools need an NIL coordinator and a compliance officer. So what that would do would be help families navigate the NIL laws, and it would help them avoid violating any state or particular state rules or state association rules like the IHSA. They'd also assist student athletes with brand building. for the athletes within the program, coordinate approvals for any NIL activities, monitor conflicts with school sponsors. That's all regarding NIL. But I also think you need somebody on staff who's a media and content manager. I know a lot of the schools and programs, they'll assign this to a student or one of their assistant coaches or new assistant coaches. But you've got all the live streams, you got the social media, you got highlight clips, you got graphics. You need to be able to work with student media and local media, different journalism departments, and make sure that your athletes are getting promoted online responsibly, effectively. The other thing, and you mentioned this, was in regards to transfers, right? So you need somebody who can manage kind of that paperwork, because transfers are going to continue. It's going to continue to grow. I think we mentioned in a previous episode where even in the state of Illinois, the number of transfer requests has doubled over the past couple of years, and that's going to continue.
Yeah, I bet it grows even higher.
It's going to go even higher for sure. You need somebody to stay on top of what the policies are regarding transfers and eligibility, any kind of legislative changes that are taking place, which we know there were some that were introduced in Illinois this year regarding transfers and right to play. You've got to be able to do the record keeping around that. The other thing I thought of, Dan, was what does this mean for the student athletes, the additional stress and pressure that's put on them, and what that means from a mental health and performance standpoint? I would think that if you were building the perfect staff at a high school that wants to stay at the forefront of what's going on, you would want to make sure that you have the school psychologists and wellness counselors who are athletically savvy, right, and can help with the athletic performance support and some of the challenges that go around that from a mental health standpoint, whether it's addressing burnout or identity issues, social media stress, those kinds of things. And then I think one more thing is you need somebody who's going to be regularly communicating with your community, your alumni engagement, NIL liaison, working with local businesses and alumni on NIL and fundraising opportunities, looking for new revenue streams from a standpoint for the high school, whether it's naming rights or other types of things. So I just think there's so much that goes into if you want to build the perfect program that's going to be at the forefront of what's going on within high school athletics, as well as making sure that you are providing the best possible environment and services to your high school athletes, which is going to position them for future success as far as what they're looking for, as far as colleges and where they want to go and what they want to do. There's all of that which goes into this, and I think it's way too much for the current staffs in high school to handle.
So you've added what, 10 people to the staff?
You know what?
Did you have a number?
I've added three people, because I think some of those things that I just mentioned, obviously you can have one person do a couple of them.
Yeah.
But I think in order to do it well, if you're a program or a high school that wants to be known for being a program or a school that is really in touch with today's student athlete and really on the lookout for them and their future and what's important to them, I think you've probably got to add 2 to 3 people who've got the actual experience and the expertise around some of these things. It can't just be handed off to, some student to handle your media. It can't just be handed off to some teacher within your school and hope that they're going to be able to come up to speed on some of these things. It's got to be somebody who's really got a grasp of it and can help you with these different things and really make a difference. I don't think you can just do what's been done in the past and just hand it off to somebody or some student.
Yeah, and the thing about using students, while ideal, right, and that'd be great. You're giving them a real world experience. They're only there for 4 years, right? So as freshmen, are they ready for something like this? They probably have to grow into something. And as soon as you really get them where you want them and where they're humming, they're leaving, right? And so that the process of kind of keeping this everything rolling is going to change based on the talent level of a student or the experience level of a student. The same goes with booster clubs or the parents in the program. They're invested as long as their child is there, right? And
Right.
then their child
Yep.
goes to college and they've got to do that. So there's always this. You're constantly recruiting and hoping that they're building a bench of people who are just as talented and savvy and experienced, or they've given them the knowledge that they have so that it can keep right on rolling, because it's not going to stand still. Things are going to adapt and change. And one thing that I think is important regarding some of this stuff is that this person needs to be strong and also understand that they're going to be parent facing, because they might have to deliver bad news, right, occasionally about transfers, the downside of it, whether it's in or out, about NIL, and you think your Johnny is a NIL superstar waiting to happen. I'm sorry, he's not,
Right.
or she's not, and it's, you're just going to have to deal with it. And you've got to have someone that can do that and deliver that. That's probably not the coach. In some cases it would be, but man, the coach has to deliver bad news about starting and playing time and dealing with losses and things like that that person becomes pretty important. And I think Joe, that NIL and transfers are important, but man, I would put another asterisk on there of retention, and making sure that, you've mentioned it a couple times, at the forefront, that we are going to continue to educate our parents and student athletes about what's out there. And so our student athletes are going to be the best prepared out of anyone in the area. So if you come to this school, you are going to be prepared for it, whether it happens for you in high school or not. You will be prepared if you are a college level athlete, that you can know that you've had the education, just like you've had in other aspects of high school, that you're educated and knowledgeable enough to understand what's happening around you.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about what we think might need to happen, or what need to be considered for the high school and the high school program from that standpoint. But the other aspect of this, Dan, is, what do individual or particular high school athletes need to think about? Not only their choice of what school they're going to go to and that type of thing, and whether or not they want to transfer or move or whatever it might be. I was thinking about some of the complexity around some of these things these days, because this is still always, or very much in flux at this point. But there's a complexity to NIL, and maybe not so much so yet at the high school level, but it's coming. We know that. We mentioned a couple times regarding transfers and eligibility, and we know this is going to happen more and more over the course of the next couple of years, because kids and parents want to put themselves in the best situation possible that they can for for themselves and for their future, which I understand completely. But one of the things, with the complexity that comes with some of these things and some of the, maybe some of the roadblocks that are being put in their way at some points, whether it's in regards to transfers or anything else along those lines, like eligibility. But do you think that there's going to be a need for high school athletes, student athletes, especially those that are kind of that higher level, or some of the quote unquote superstars, where they may need some kind of representation in order to kind of facilitate what they're going to go through in high school and put themselves in the best position, really, regarding NIL and some of the other things regarding creating their own image and brand deals and that. Do you think they're going to need something like that, or individual athletes are going to need some kind of representation or assistance along those lines?
I hope not, because I think it opens a can of worms
Yeah.
for so many bad things and so many horror stories that you can already read the newspaper article about someone being bilked out of money, by someone who said they had their child's best interests at heart, and they were paid X amount of dollars and they didn't do anything, and the money's gone. Right? It
Right.
just opens the door for that. I would hope, Joe, that you can, with these changes we talked about with your staff, that the goal would be that you, as a student athlete, you focus on being a student and being an athlete and doing what makes you successful in both those fields, right? So that you're not overwhelmed with all this outside stuff. Your main focus can be on training, getting better, being a good student, being a good teammate. That would be my goal as a high school, to, as far as implementing some of these changes or adding staff or whatever it may be. My goal would be that I want the student athletes, to have a good student athlete experience and a good high school experience, where they are building loyalty, falling in love with the school, getting deep relationships with their friends, over the course of time that they're going to have for the next 40 years. I would say that to people, that is our goal, that your student athlete can do this, and that should be your goal, that they can just focus on being a student and an athlete, and not have to spend time, effort, and energy, on all this stuff, and hiring an agent. I would think that's just a can of worms that's going to have a lot of bad stuff associated
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree with you on that. Although I'm tr- I look at the aspect of it, and I'm trying to be realistic about this. And when there's a significant amount of money involved, which we know how that's working at the college level, that's eventually going to move down to the high school level. I think you and I are probably in agreement on that, as far as how things push down to the high school level. It may take a while, but it gets there eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And we always know that there's different individual cases around the country where what you just mentioned, Dan, as far as wanting to build, a high school athlete wanting to be a part of a program, want to be a part of something at the high school level, and want to help and be a part of a team in that. You know, I agree 100% with that, but what I've seen is that that's not always the case
Right.
across, when you take into account the whole country and what's going on in high school or college athletics. There's, in a lot of cases, there's a me first attitude,
Yeah.
and I just think eventually that's going to happen in high school too. And that's going to translate to certain things being more of a business transaction from a high school standpoint, rather than, what what you and I think of the high school experience as. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, and I think you leave that up to the individual families then,
Right.
and so because there's socioeconomic factors too that you've got to weigh with this, and you know, if I feel like we could use some help, with recruiting, NIL, choosing a school, all that, and need someone as an outside source, I will want to do that privately, and just understand that's buyer beware. And so, because with that, Joe, comes a lot of unscrupulous characters and
Right.
people that don't have your best interest at heart.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at, you said it, transactional, and they want to be part of that transaction. And so, faster than you can blink, you'll have a signed contract that says, and you'll be an NIL stud in college, and someone will come knocking on your door and say, "Hey, that 50 grand you just made? You signed that contract with me back when you were a senior in high school. That I get 50% forever."
Right.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What? So I think that's got to be out there. But you're right; it is going to happen. I don't think that some of the schools. I would not want to have any sort of staff member, anything else that had any sort of affiliation or would even have some sort of, it's probably not legal anyway, but relationship with an outside consultant or something like that was individual oriented. I would hope that I could frame it so people have the education and understand that there's maybe that's part of the education, Joe, is if I'm being educated, know that if someone knocks on my door wanting to represent me in NIL deals, that I better have 2 and 3 people look at it who do have my best interests at heart, or an attorney, someone. And there's that word again. That's where we're going,
Right. We always have to get the attorneys involved, don't we? Yeah.
and in some cases, I think you need it with a
I
lot
do.
of this. There's
Yeah.
because the other folks are using that. The people who are creating NIL deals, the people who are coming up with the transfer rules, the people who are legislating it, are talking to staffing with attorneys, so they know they can be right and on the right side. So, I guess I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. So, but you probably,
So what else is new?
yeah, exactly. But you're probably going to have to, yeah. I think what I said makes a lot of sense. Buyer
It
beware.
does. Yes. Buyer beware for sure. So there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, Dan. You got a couple more minutes?
Yep. I got nothing but time for you, Joe.
All right, good. And this is a little more local, right? I mean, we've been talking about some topics here that are, apply nationally for sure in regards to high school sports. But, something closer to home and in regards to Illinois. And there were 2 pieces of legislation which were introduced this year, and it still has not been determined whether or not these are going forward or not within the Illinois House. But one was around right to play, right? And that one seems to have some traction.
I thought it was settled though, Joe. I thought the IHSA and the state house came up with an agreement that said the IHSA would go with it, right?
All right, good.
And do something like, and I might not have it perfect, shocker, but that they cut a deal, between them and the government. So because the IHSA did not want a rule on law, in state
Right.
law.
Okay.
They wanted to still be controlling that, and so I think it was.
I'm shocked about that, Dan.
Yeah, right. They would implement right to play, and if they didn't at a certain period of time, the legislature would take it back up.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I was looking at that legislation earlier, and I couldn't tell whether or not it was something that, was kind of stopped in its tracks because it was making some progress through the Illinois legislature, or whether or not something else happened. But if that's the case, and the IHS is going to be or have the ability to kind of monitor that or regulate it to some extent, then, I get that. And, I think you mentioned that it was, or maybe we talked about before that it was something that, they're letting particular players or student athletes do a couple of times a year be able to compete in something within their own sport during their actual season, right?
Yeah, they might get one or two times where they can do that. It is limited. It's gonna be overseen by the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe.
No, that was all right. It was Deloitte, wasn't it? And
That was on
by
the
no way
NCAA
are
side.
we correlating Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe with Deloitte, right?
The so yeah, I think there's probably some things that are to be determined on that, and
Yeah.
but and then the other one I know that we talked about was the transfer one. I have not heard or seen more news on that. I don't know if that died in committee.
I think that did. I think that died in committee. So I don't think anything's going to happen with that. But, one of the things I wanted to, you know, correlate here was those two things, the right to play and transfer. So since Illinois is not going to allow just kind of, we'll call it free transferring between schools, for a couple of times, one time, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
but they are going to allow some type of right to play. Do you think there's going to be, or do you think this is in the future, or going to happen over the course of the future? Is that there might be very talented kids who will opt not to play as a part of their high school and just play on some of the club sports and maybe some of the showcase type events, that type of thing going forward rather than compete on their high school teams. Do you think that is something that might happen going forward?
I I don't know if this is what you're saying, but what I do think will happen will be players having the opportunity to play in a showcase during the season that where you will have a player that decides to skip Friday night to play Sunday afternoon in the showcase,
Ah,
or a player that doesn't go to practice, one or two nights during a week because they've got to practice for a showcase.
yeah,
I don't, like it's hard for me to get my head around that, and maybe it starts where it's 7-on-7, and because football is just so practice critical, right? That you can't just say, hey, we're having a showcase on Sunday afternoon at Soldier Field. There's going to be 100 colleges there. Come on out and play. You're invited, and just line up and play.
yeah,
You've got to practice. So that might be the challenge. I do think you're going to see some sort of showcase events in some way, shape, or form. And at some point, you're going to see players. It'll make the news. A player skipping a game to prepare for a showcase, or
yeah.
they don't want to get hurt on Friday night because they're going to a showcase on Sunday. I do think that's in our future, in the next several years.
Yeah. And, I can't help but think too that, with the proliferation of some of the club teams, whatever sport it might be, and the exposure that they're starting to get, that, at some point there may be, some students or some student athletes who decide, you know what, I really don't need to play for my high school team. I
Yeah,
could
well, you're
just,
getting that in other sports. So you
yeah,
see that with soccer, I think a lot. I've heard of that from back in my coaching days. That there's a stud soccer player who doesn't even play, or hockey. A hockey player that is a stud that doesn't play for the high school because they play on a club team,
right.
and they get more exposure on the club team. Whether because we're a football centric podcast. Whether and how that looks when it comes to football, I don't know. I always think that there's some hurdles that might be difficult to overcome as far as cost and insurance and those sort of things to put together a club team like that. But it can't be that much different than youth football. I mean,
Right.
I would think there's got to be some of that, that they face now and seem to be able to overcome, whether you get sponsors or whatever. So, yeah, probably when we're in our 10th year, Joe, we'll probably be talking about
10th year.
The Chicago Catholic League and the club teams that they're going to play.
Right.
Week 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And all I'm sorry, it kind of correlates with what we've talked about a little bit with scheduling too, that if you've got some of these super teams happening, which I think is what you'll have, the haves and the have-nots, the transfers, that's my opinion, that is it maybe not club first, but hey, we're not going to transfer there unless you're playing a national schedule.
Yeah.
Or where you're playing the best of the best every week. State championship trophy will be nice, but if we're not eligible because we play a national schedule and, so be it, we get a scholarship with $100,000 opportunity. Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah.
We'll do that. So yeah, there's probably some things coming. It's going to continue to change, right, Joe? The five alarm fire doesn't just stop, right? Unless someone puts a hose to it. So,
right.
So,
and even then it might not stop.
Yeah. So there's who knows what it's going to look like in the next 10 years, but all this stuff we're kind of guessing about right now, someone's listening right now thinking to themselves, I am going to put a showcase together on a Sunday afternoon.
Right.
Maybe it's 7-on-7 for skill positions and linemen can do one-on-one. The big skill guys can do
big skill guys
and pass pro and that sort of thing that we can do. Yeah. And they can do that and play their games on Friday night.
Of course.
I bet that's happening right now. I bet someone's thinking about that right now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's nothing out there that people aren't thinking about as far as how they can work within the current rules and what they can do about that. And, either make some money or, help kids get more exposure, and maybe both at the same time.
Here's what it'll be. You are looking live at Soldier Field for the Varsity Voices inaugural showcase games.
We've got the 44 best kids within blah, blah, blah playing in this game, right?
Yeah. And in which case you'll have to go back and delete this episode from our history.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right. But one thing we can guarantee people, our listeners, is that we will be on top of all these things that are going on. And
we'll make you think about it for sure. And schools as well. You got to be thinking about it. Got to be thinking about it. Yeah. Get some help for your head coaches too. They need it.
That's a really good message to leave everybody with, is that they do have to be thinking about it. If they don't, and it doesn't have to be at the very, very, very extreme levels, right? It's just got to be that you are addressing these things which are part of the landscape right now in high school athletics.
Yeah.
If you can show that you're doing that, I think that that's going to benefit you as a program, as a school. It's going to help the kids in your program. If you look at it that way versus we're trying to make as much money as we want or as much money as we can for you and the kids and that, look at it more like we're going to help you. We're going to put you on the right track. We're going to facilitate whatever we can to help you, be the best that you can and do the best that you can and get as far as you can within whatever you want to do. Right.
Yeah. Here's a wild concept, Joe. Let's educate them.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we here to do? This is the world changing around them. You can either whisper about and complain about in the corners that, all this stuff happens. These other schools, seem to get whatever kids they want or however, or no one's choosing our school anymore. They're all going somewhere else, or we never get the good players. Or you can make a decision to, we're going to make this part of our curriculum, so to speak, or at least part of our athletic program,
Right.
and give people who have, give families and kids who have a choice, something to really think about, as their kids get older, and the choices they're going to face. So, I mean, that's should be what high school's about, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's got to be what it's about these days, for sure.
Yeah. They always talked about, there should have been a class on how to write a check. No one ever taught anyone how to write a check or balance a checkbook.
Boy, are you old school.
Now it's like, hey, there's a lot happening here. Let's be, love your work, be at the forefront, and like you said, you don't have to add your 3 staff members, by the end of the week, but if you can just start talking about it, don't make it something you whisper about. Don't transfer.
Right.
It's coming in and we might have a potential transfer, embrace it, it. Or so-and-so's, just talk to Johnny, and I heard he's thinking about transferring. Well, make sure, be on top of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Be on top of transfer and retention.
Yeah. Embrace it, I think is a good way to put it.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will embrace it as we always do, and we will continue to bring you any information, any up-to-date stuff that we have regarding all sorts of topics related to high school sports, as well as the Chicago Catholic League. As always, we appreciate you listening, and make sure you, wherever you're listening from, like, follow, and subscribe to us. Also, follow us on social media. We're out there on all the different social media sites, and we appreciate you watching us there and listening to us there as well. But as always, as most, we appreciate you listening to us, and we'll be talking with you soon.